Oh, the good times were golden. This little country became for a while the most successful in Europe, attracting workers from all over the world to feed its roaring Celtic tiger economy.
Nobody cared about the price of anything. I mean, you could go into a restaurant and be overcharged and nobody would even notice. Nobody knew what the price of a pint of milk was anymore. Nobody knew what the price of a pound of butter was. We just shelled out the money because we had it.
And you were regarded as a bit of a mean type, really, if you checked the bill.
Indeed, yes. They're checking the bills now, though.
We let it get out of control. We moved from proper export-led growth to a consumer boom, spending like there was no tomorrow, and spending particularly on property.
Can I get you a cup of tea or anything?
This is Aoife's house, bright and comfortable and very new.
Oh, the fireplace with no fire.
She and her partner moved into this half-built housing estate last year, and the house is worth €50,000 less already.
When we were buying the house, we knew it was a risk. We knew the prices could have dropped down. At the same time, myself and Tom, we were taking out a 100% mortgage, which we wouldn't be able to do now. So we wouldn't have been able to buy a house if we had have waited. When we were looking at houses for a long time, we were told many's a lies by many's estate agents and things that we were dealing with. This house is going to be gone, you know, the usual things that they sell you. And there was a degree of panic buying.
Yes, and you were told if you don't buy today, it's going to
gone.
be dearer.
Oh, it's gone tomorrow, and you'll knock at this house will be gone. And mobile numbers were taken, and there was estate agents that were calling us every weekend. We've dropped the price again. We've only got one. We're holding it for you. All these sort of things that were happening now. So there was definitely a degree of this will be gone. And as you can see, there's nobody next door to me, so...
There are ghost villages like this all over Ireland now, like this housing estate in Drogheda, one of many I've been to today, with cranes in the background, with half-finished houses here beside me. They're new houses, not moss-covered and picturesque like the homes deserted by waves of Irish emigrants forced to leave in the past, but they're just as sad, because these new developments of houses and apartments are monuments to Ireland's extraordinary belief that we had found the answer to everlasting economic growth, and that answer was houses, houses, and more houses.
Yes, they're empty now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I'm driving through another half-empty estate here in Drogheda, which is 30 miles north of Dublin and now part of the commuter belt. I'm with Laura, who lives nearby. It's pouring rain, and we retire to her kitchen. When you were looking at the Irish property market, what was in your mind?
Well, it was a totally overinflated price. Absolutely. Dublin was outrageous for what you were getting. You know, we have 4 kids. It's a 3-bedroom house, so that doesn't quite fit, but they had to. I mean, it would have been nice to have gotten one of the great big 5-bedroom houses, but there's no way I would not have been happy.
And, I mean, you're from the States. What was it like talking to people at home, to your family, and telling them what the cost of houses was?
It was nearly as exciting to bring them to the window of an estate agent as it was to some of the Mellifont Abbeys and stuff, because they would just look and they were just astounded.
At the prices?
At the prices and the descriptions. I grew up mostly in Virginia, and I was, okay, well, you know, but how much were the houses here? Well, they were under the 200 mark, and I was like, I cannot believe that I'm buying a 3-bedroom dinky, you know, a small little house in a suburban town for that much money. I could buy a small tobacco plantation down in Richmond for the same price, you know, and it was just true.
A loft apartment in the heart of Dublin, and this is where Frank MacDonald is at home.
Well, it's like a little...
As Irish Times environment correspondent, he's railed for years against the cosy relationship between planners, developers and politicians, and against the high prices that pushed people out of the city. Today's Irish Times property supplement, once the cheerleader for the boom, tells its own story. But you know, I went into my own newsman early this morning to get the Irish Times, and when I picked it up, he said, yeah, it's light, isn't it? And this was Thursday.
I know, yeah.
When the wonderful, glorious property supplement usually weighs down the paper, and the paper was very, very light.
Well, the property supplement used to be up to 64 pages at the height of the boom.
Was it 64?
Up to 64, yeah.
Well, it's 8 today.
And they had to publish it in 2 parts because it was so big. And now it's down to a literal fraction of what it was, because there's just so few transactions taking place.
Yeah, it was mad stuff.
Mad stuff. But the thing is that, you know, I remember at the height of the boom, which would have been in February 2007, I was in Paris, and myself and this friend of mine who is a former property, she used to work for Temple Bar Properties in Dublin, and she's now a property consultant in Paris, and we sat down and worked it out over dinner that the price of residential property in Dublin was more expensive than in the centre of Paris. And it was at that point, you know, on just per square metre, and at that point I just thought, this is just completely insane. I mean, how could property in Dublin, which is a relatively small, peripherally located European city, be worth more than in the cultural capital of Europe?
And the high prices pushed people further and further out of Dublin, not only to Drogheda, which at least has a train line, but to Cavan, to Kinnegad, to Tullow, places with no train connection and a 2 or 3 hour round-trip commute. The planning was haphazard, while developers sometimes built spa hotels and golf courses to serve the new residents. Basic services in little local villages were overwhelmed by the numbers, and village schools were swamped. Irish farmers couldn't believe their luck as fields in the middle of nowhere sprouted houses. It was the most lucrative crop they'd ever had because demand was massive and the government was fuelling it.
The government had introduced this scheme way back in the early 1980s to kind of kick-start the construction industry, which was on its knees at that stage, called Section 23. And it was one of these things where if you bought an apartment to let, that you could claim the entire capital outlay against your tax liability from any source, whether your own income or from rental income on other properties or whatever. So the thing became an enormous boondoggle, and loads of people got involved.
What sort of people?
You know, there was this extraordinary case that came to light last December where an Air Corps pilot had built up a mini property empire of his own, consisting of 12 different houses in places ranging from Donegal to Dublin, and had a total indebtedness to the banks of 8 million.
And this was a guy who'd be on a salary of what? About
50,000.
50,000 a year?
Yeah. I mean, the banks were throwing money at people. There's no question about that.
Taxi drivers.
And
1, 2 apartments. Didn't they?
A holiday apartment in Spain and some buy-to-let property in Dublin, which was making good rental income because there was a huge influx of people from overseas, particularly from Poland and some of the other newer countries in the European Union. And they came to Dublin because the construction industry was booming, there were loads of jobs to be had, and they needed places to stay. So they were actually building their own accommodation, in effect.
You had tax breaks for building houses as part of urban renewal, for holiday homes. You had breaks
for hotels, for multi-storey car parks, for run-down seaside resorts, for anything you care to mention, there were tax breaks. Yeah. And none of these were really justified, in my opinion, at all, because they contributed to the artificial inflation of the bubble.